We heard the last talk was in Russian, and what a turn here to Spanish. Whoa, it's happier, I can tell. There's something different with the beat. But it was a beautiful meeting, great meeting with Tina Moskowitz and Polina Barsakova. It was ecstatic. And here is another meeting, another conversation with Tal Nitzan, which I will introduce, and she will introduce later on in a few minutes Viktor Rodriges Nunez. Ahlan, Viktor.
Hi, how are you?
Great to talk to you here from Jerusalem. And my name is Gilad Meiri, and I am the co-artist director of this poetry Place International Zoom Festival with Noah Shakarji. And I wish to welcome you all to this meeting. And I'm honored to introduce Tal Nitzan, who is an award-winning poet, novelist, and a major translator of Hispanic literature. She published 2 novels and 7 poetry collections. Her poems have been translated to more than 20 languages, and 12 collections of her work were published in translation. And Tal, please now introduce Viktor Rodriges Nunez.
Okay, first of all, I want to mention that I had the pleasure to translate a collection of Victor's poetry.
That here in the chat, if someone wants to buy it, it's here. We put a link in the chat to the publishing house website.
Okay, this is the book we are both showing. It was published 3 years ago in Pardes. It's bilingual, Hebrew-English. So, and this is the dedication I got from Victor, and you can't see it in Zoom, but it's written in gold. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember.
So I'll just read the introduction just as we wrote it in that book, because it's very informative. ויקטור רודריגס נוניס, שנולד בהוואנה, קובה, 1955, הוא משורר, עיתונאי, מבקר, מתרגם ומרצה. פרסם 14 ספרי שירה, שרובם ככולם זכו בפרסים בינלאומיים. מבחרים משיריו ראו אור ב7 ארצות, בספרדית וכן בגרמנית, סינית, צרפתית, אנגלית, איטלקית, מקדונית, סרבית ושוודית. לדעתי זה לא מעודכן להיום. You've been translated to Chinese lately, right?
Vietnamese.
And Vietnamese. Okay, we should update the info in the book. I'm sorry, my cats are fighting in the next room, so nothing to worry about. Normal. בשנות ה-80 ערך את כתב העת הקובני לתרבות, התנין המזוקן, ערך 3 אנתולוגיות לשירה קובנית, תרגם שירה מאנגלית לספרדית ומספרדית לאנגלית, בעל תואר דוקטור לספרות היספנית מאוניברסיטת טקסס באוסטין, כיום הוא מרצה באותו מקצוע בקניון קולג' ארצות הברית. I suggest, Victor, that we start by one of your poems, by reading, and then we'll keep talking. I suggest we start by Vuelo, page 167 in our book.
Okay. $167.
Yes, Vuelo.
Okay, Vuelo. First of all, thank you so much for this invitation. At least we have, the possibility to meet in this way, Think that in the past we didn't have this. Let's give off a little bit of optimism in this really difficult situation. And thank you so much, Tal, for translate for me my voice in Hebrew. It's such an honor for me.
Pleasure.
Vuelo 2. Entre las nubes nadie es extranjero. latitud de la lengua, longitud de la sangre, materia que se piensa y contradice, agua, vapor, escarcha, rápido de los Andes, témpano de Noruega, lágrima de Caimán, transpiración. Nunca tropiezas con la misma gota, con el otro carámbano, sino la turbulencia que entrecruza las penas, su comercio intangible, estela de lo informe. Eres el compatriota de las nubes.
מעוף. בקרב העננים אין איש נוכרי. קו הרוחב של הלשון, קו האורך של הדם, חומר שחולף במחשבה ומוכחש. מים, עדים, כפור, מפל מהאנדים, שכבת קרח מנורווגיה, זהה. לעולם אינך נתקל באותה טיפה, באותו נטיף קרח, אלא במערבולת השוזרת את העצבונות, במסחרה החמקמק, בשובלו של החסר צורה, אתה בין ארצם של העננים. This very beautiful poem, Victor, leads me to the first question I would like to ask you. You are speaking here of the Andes, the mountains in South America and Norwegia, but finally the last verse is Eres el compatriota de las nubes, אתה בין ארצם של העננים. And of course, this is almost an inevitable question for someone like you. Where do you belong? You belong to the clouds, according to this poem. You're very Cuban, but you've been so many years in the United States. Where are your roots and where do you fly?
Well, first of all, something that has been so important of this experience of live outside my country is developed a really truly identity. An identity that go beyond the national borders. And that make me, you know, very strong opposed to all kind of nationalism. I think the majority of identities are built using negation as a base, differentiation as a base. You know, we Cubans are different from American for this, for that, or from the Mexican or whatever. No? And this is not, in my opinion, the way to develop a really truly identity. The real identity you get only if you use the opposite way, identification. And I start thinking in that way, and I have started establishing relationship with many different kind of cultures, people, etc. It's not exactly cosmopolitanism. It's a conscience that you can find somebody who you develop a wonderful human relationship everywhere, you know. And in Cuba, the nature is so beautiful, but here in Ohio is beautiful too, have a different kind of beauty. And that is what really, really matter, I think, in this time. And not being an advocate of kind of global citizenship, anything like this, because you know at the beginning, I am Cuba, I cannot deny that part of my, I don't have to do it. You know, that doesn't make any sense to deny my origins, but we can go beyond that.
You're mentioning a human identity, and maybe there's another one that we should speak of, and it's your poetic identity. And we'll get to it, I think, through the next poem that I wanted to read, and it's Oregon City. It's on page 171 in our book.
Yeah, I like this poem a lot. Thank you, Tal, for choosing it. Oregon City. Entre un azulejo que salta desde la hierba con la primera luz y un verso de Szymborska contra los desencuentros de la muerte, te quedas con la duda, su tallo inoxidable, su corola geométrica, espigan los escombros a manos del rocío, su terca sed celeste, la rima de otro mundo. Significante, sin significado. Cada cosa una voz, con nada que decir.
Well, it is indeed a beautiful poem, and I like it among other reasons because I'm in it too. Rocio, that's me. I'll read it in Hebrew now. Oregon City. בין עורב כחול המנטר מתוך העשב עם אור ראשון, לשורה של שימבורסקה, כנגד החמצות המוות, אתה נשאר עם הספק, עם גבעול האלחלד שלו. כותרתו הגיאומטרית, גובהות ההריסות בידי הטל, צמאונו התחול העיקש חרוז מעולם אחר, מסמן בלא מסומן, כל דבר הוא קול שאין לו מה לומר. Now, in this poem, a very interesting thing happens ontologically, we could say. You move from a bird to a verse by Szymborska. You move from a sound in reality to a rhyme in a poem. And in many of your poems, I feel that that your home address is in some poem. Also, it happens a lot in your poems that you speak with other poets, you dedicate to many poets. Poets are present in your poems. Other poets' verses take place in your poems. You really are very, let's say, a very energetic. You take place very energetically in poetry in general, and maybe it's some kind of a substitute home for you.
Well, first of all, for me, those difference between objective and subjective, outside, inside, abstract and concrete, they don't work for me. And if you, for me, that bird that is jumping, playing in the outside me, is part of the reality as lines of whatever poet. You know, there is not, we are, there is a lot of contamination, even in the worst way, from philosophy into poetry. Poetry and philosophy are two things very different. Poetry is thought. It's a way of thinking. Philosophy is a different kind of way of thinking. We don't think that I hate that kind of phrase that, for instance, they say, well, Chinese have thought, they don't have philosophy. You know, this is a very Western way of thinking. And why we have to take and keep using those categories that are very based in other interests that really explain life. And for that reason, for me, there are not different between any order of what we call reality, you know? And for me, poetry is objective. Poetry is matter too. Poetry, this is solid. You know, this is sound. That's when you realize that kind of thing, I came from a Marxist tradition, but for Marxism, poetry is a reflection of reality. That's not a reflection of reality, it's reality itself. You know?
I rest my case. I would like to read now Arte Poetica. It's on page 45.
Okay. Right. Arte poética. Saqué unos ojos miopes, una nariz bisiesta, unos labios que no puedo juntar, un pelo de camello, más un cuerpo de atleta retirado. También el mal genio de mi padre, el dolor en el lado de mi madre, el lunar sospechoso de mi abuela, el cólico nefrítico de todos y hasta las fiebres constantes de mi hijo. Razones que me obligan a tener mala opinión de la belleza.
אומנות השיר, הכותרת היא עם סימן שאלה. קיבלתי עיניים פוזלות, אף מעובר, שפתיים שאיני יכול להצמיד יחד, שיער גמל, יותר גוף משל אתלט בדימוס, וגם את המזג הרע של אבי, הכאב בצד של אמי, השומה החשודה של סבתי, האבית הכלייתית של כולם, ואפילו התקפי החום התכופים של בני. מכל הסיבות הללו, אני נאלץ להחזיק בדעה שלילית על היופי. I think this poem, first of all, I don't believe you that you have a negative view about beauty. I think you're very close to beauty, but you're speaking here of a very specific beauty, maybe the physical beauty. Mm-hmm. But I think you aim for beauty in everything that you do, in every verse that you write. But another aspect of your poetry that is very clear in this poem is, of course, the sense of humor. And I think this is a very good timing to speak about humor, how it helps us, how it protects us, how we can use humor as a protection, as an, איך אומרים, נשק, שיט.
Well, humor helped us to deal with situation like this, you know, all kind of situation, you know. Humor have a very, very, very close relationship with poetry. Poetry, the only, you know, means of poetry is help us to live, you know, help us with situation like this that we are living, you know. Verse is the opposite of adverse, the adversity, you know, between verse and adversity. Those are really, it's not just a words, you know, play. It's true. And humor have the same, let's say, cognitive, it's a cognitive tool like poetry, because poetry and humor both help you to defamiliarize the reality and see reality in a different way, you know. And this is really, really, really important. Things that right now are going on are that we are related with poetry and humor in the sense of we are seeing our world in a different way.
In a way, it brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. Maybe you would like to elaborate a little bit about the anthology of death that you mentioned?
Well, it's we were not expecting that. I think we human beings, we went beyond certain limits that we in our relationship with nature, we went too far away, and we will be paying for that. We are paying for that, and we will be paying for that. We will have to rethink what are the limits of ourselves, you know. And did happen, you know, in China, but this could happen in whatever place. It's something that was our relationship with nature. We have to be invading too many spaces that are not our space. We thought really that we were superiors of nature, or we were, you know, the chosen one.
Hebrews has a price.
But that's half a very bad price. Well, and I say that joke because, you know, people of my age or are more vulnerable to the virus than other people. Even though there are many young people dying, you know, too. Really, when you
terrible.
Yes. Well, and that's what my little reflection about what is going on. And my generation is suffering a lot. There are many people dying.
In parentheses, we'll go back to poetry in a minute, but we all hear a lot of what's going on through the media in the United States and in Europe. But can you tell us a little bit of what the situation is in Cuba?
Okay. Well, first of all, in the United States, we have a horrible president, and the president and the government.
Unbelievable, really.
It's not helping at all.
To say the least.
Problem. Fortunately, in the state of Ohio, this is a big country, and in the state of Ohio, we have a governor who is a Republican, who is doing his own thing and not following Trump in any way. And here in Ohio, we start all the process of protecting from the virus earlier. And for that reason, the virus is under control. In Ohio, we have a wonderful Secretary of Health in Ohio. That's it. In Cuba, the situation, as far as I know, the virus is under control. There is a quarantine like every place, and they have really a good doctors who have been dealing with this kind of pandemic everywhere in other cases, and they know what to do professionally. Is very well. The problem in Cuba is the lack of resources. You know, that is a very poor country. It's a country under embargo. It's a country that suffers from an old-fashioned way of socialism. You know, a kind of neo-Stalinist government, and basically, Cuban people are suffering a lot.
Well, if we could pray, we would be praying now, really.
Yeah.
Let's go back to poetry. This is our prayer. Maybe we should read Un poema con tigre, page 17.
Un poema con tigre. Un poema con tigre. Me persigue el tigre de Blake, el oro de su piel, el fragor de su impaciencia. Ayer, mientras llovía, asaltó una reunión de mi comité de base y no quedó un papel en su sitio. Lo siento por las actas, yo las hago. Se bebió los ojos de un amigo y de un zarpazo dejó desnuda a Esther, precisamente a Esther, y sus pechos de madera bendita temblaron en el aire con olor a naranjas que presienten el fuego. Me persigue el tigre de Blake, su poderosa respiración de astro, el ardor de sus garras. No terminaré nunca este poema.
שיר עם נמר. הנמר של בלייק רודף אותי. זהב אורו, קוצר רוחו השואג. אתמול כשירד גשם, הוא הסתער על אספת החברים שלנו, ולא הותיר פיסת נייר אחת במקומה. כואב לי על הפרוטוקול, אני רושם אותו. שתה את עיניו של אחד החברים, ובשריטה אחת הפשיט את אסתר, דווקא את אסתר, ושדי העץ הקדוש שלה רטטו באוויר, בריח תפוזים אחוזים את האש. הנמר של בלייק רודף אותי, נשמתו האימתנית כשל כוכב, להט טלפיו, לעולם לא אשלים את השיר הזה. Maybe Victor, if I had to choose maybe one poem that is like a microcosmos of Victor Rodrigas Nunez poetry, it could be this one, because it has so many elements that are so typical to your poetry. The tropical atmosphere, and of course, the presence of poet Blake and poetry. And of course, the last verse that is like you watching yourself and commenting about yourself with one hand is writing this poem and the poet is following it and commenting about it.
Well, thank you so much, Tal, for that, reading, in deep reading. When I wrote that poem a long time ago, that's a poem from my first book. That means in the 70s.
What was the title? What was the title of that book?
The title of the anthology, Con Raro Olor a Mundo.
No, the first book.
Oh, my first book was a book called Kayama.
Ah, right.
And this is it is a chapbook, really. That's not a book. Was important for me, but really I started with this book, Con Raro Olor a Mundo, that we used the title in
Anthology.
Hebrew translation, selected poems. Well, the thing is that I always, from the beginning, I had a really weird feeling that when I was writing poetry, I was outside of myself. I don't feel in myself. I was in some place even seeing myself writing. And that is something that is in this poem kind of more explicit.
Yeah.
Well, with the years and thinking more about this, is that one of the best things about writing poetry is that give you the opportunity to be other person, to be the other and see yourself from outside and be probably the person that you want to be, not the person that you are, and that in that kind of dialectical relationship is that where is everywhere. It's a love poem too. This is a love poem. I never have been a minute of my life without love, and this is something that I have to write about.
Absolutely, you have to write about and be grateful about it.
Thank you.
And Victor, there was a question in the chat. There was a request to talk about the song a bit, maybe to explain more about it, if there's anything else to say.
Could you repeat the question, because I was a kind of distortion in the audio.
Yeah, there was just a request in the chat. If you can say something more about the poem, I guess what it means that it was not really understood. This is maybe what I guess from this question.
About this poem, a poem with Tiger?
Yeah, yes.
Well, I was reading Blake at that time. Blake is really, really an important poet for everybody and for me. And what I learned from Blake is the power of the image. Blake was a painter too, and there is a lot of, in his representation of the word, there is a lot of, he showed me, among other things, that poetry have a very strong visual component. I have to visualize even the most abstract ideas in order to, that's my goal as a poet. When I was young, I was a young communist, like many people of my generation in Cuba. We grew up in a revolution, you know, in the Marxist revolution, and from the beginning, I was, you know, that in many kind of organization of that kind, every time that there is a meeting, you have to have notes. I was always, because I was a writer, they forced me to take notes of every meeting, because I was able supposedly to do better than any other one, and that was really a lot of work. And basically I was losing my interest, but I was interested in the person who is mentioned in that meeting that helped a lot, you know, to be happy in that place. And that's exactly the point. And I was always, they think in the meetings, they thought that I was taking notes, and sometimes I was writing poetry in the meeting. You know, I used the same notebook that I took the notes to the political meetings to write poetry.
Maybe.
So, Comrade Victor, you wrote poetry instead of protocol. Naughty boy.
Poetry is some kind of a protocol, I
Yeah.
think. Maybe we shall read one last poem and leave some time for questions that I think people would like to ask you. And a poem that I really, really like is Fabula on page 11.
Fabula belonged to my first book, Tal. It's the only poem that I rescue from that, my very best publication, that chapbook, Kayama.
Okay.
I was like 17 years old when I wrote that poem, Mercy, okay?
Really? We have mercy, but you don't need it. You will not need it.
Fábula. Ese pájaro come a grandes picotazos el silencio, lo busca entre las hojas más deshechas y es un escalofrío en la única rama de la tarde. Luego alzará el vuelo, será una nube rauda sobre sierras azules donde solo florecen mi madre y las estrellas. Será el canto, la víscera, el ojo ya sin dueño, lo que se vuelve polvo, piedra que se desangra contra el arco de plomo del disparo. Aunque ese mismo pájaro regrese, renacido del humo y la ceniza, y se pose de nuevo como un nido en la única rama de la tarde.
אגדה. הציפור הזו מנקרת בשקט בנגיסות גדולות, מחפשת אותו בין המתפוררים שבעלים, והיא צמרמורת בענף היחידי של הערב. אחר כך תתעופף ותהה ענן חולף על רכסים כחולים, שם פורחים רק אמי והכוכבים. שירתה תהיה הקרביים, העין נטולת הבעלים, מה שמתפורר לאבק, אבן שותתת דם כנגד קשת העופרת של הירייה. אף אם אותה ציפור עצמה תשוב, תיוולד מחדש מתוך העשן והאפר, ותתייצב מחדש כמו כן על הענף היחידי של הערב. It's really beautiful and it's a very mature poem. It really seems unbelievable. It was written by a 17-year-old chap.
Yeah.
One last question before everybody else can ask you questions is, I know that your translation, you've been translated to so many languages. Now we have also Vietnamese and Chinese, but I know that being published in Hebrew was especially meaningful for you. And I wonder why.
Of course, because, well, it's a language with a history that I love. I feel very identified, you know. It's what is called, you know, a small language. And what is really, really unnecessary, of course, in terms of numbers, and this is a quantitative approach, and there aren't any small language at all, you know. And what is really interesting to me is that in places like Israel and in the whole Hebrew language, there are poets that interest more to me than poets from bigger languages. You know, the size of the speakers doesn't make really any impact the kind of production of poetry. In the English language, is amazing the amount of crap that is published. You know, the amount of book, you know, is so frustrating too. There are just few poets in the English language right now, and I am more familiar with the English now. I know more about that poetry. And that happened in, you know, big languages. It took me a lot of time, for instance, to find out who are the best Chinese poets right now. And for that reason, this book means a lot to me. And you know, I was dreaming that Tal Nitzan, who have been translated the majority of really good poets in the Spanish language into Hebrew, did do this translation for me.
I'll just remind you, the first time we met was in a festival in France. We were standing in line to get lunch.
Exactly.
And we started talking, and you asked me what I do, etc. And I said, among other things, I translate poetry from Spanish. And he said, oh, really? Like, for example, who did you translate? And I said, I don't know, maybe you heard about Pablo Neruda.
I don't know him.
Yeah, and you didn't, of course. You never heard about him.
Yeah. I still love Neruda. You know, I have my times, you know, that I try to, but even Neruda in his worst poem have a good line.
And he has some bad ones too.
Oh yeah, he has really, really bad poems. Like Vallejo have bad poems too, you know, and everybody have bad poems, you know. That's something that helps, you know, to keep doing this, you know. But Neruda, even in his worst poem, have a line that you really, really want to, you know, be there.
Yeah, that power. Do we have some minutes for questions?
Yes, you sure do. And I just want to tell you, Victor, that in the chat, many people who are applauding to the poetry. And I just want to say that Neruda and Lorca met, I think in the late 20s, something like that. And I think they met in your poetry also. There is this combination of Lorca and Neruda, some kind of a surrealist touch that I can see, you know, in Hebrew, say, בענף היחידי של הערב. Tal, maybe you can read it better in Spanish. I can try, but I don't want to fail with reading it. And I can see it. Do you feel that combination in yourself as a poet?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, Federico Garcia Lorca was who made me write. I never have thought about myself as a poet or as a writer, but I took with me Federico Garcia Lorca's anthology to go to, in Cuba in the 70s, we spent in high school, middle school, like a month working in the country, you know, and was kind of socialist way to teach us that, you know, how to do manual work in the farms, etc. And I took that book, and I was reading that book, and I got fascinated with Lorca's poetry, and I started writing because of Lorca. Then I did a more in-deep reading of Lorca, all the poets of the so-called generation of 27 in Spain, Alberti, and I moved, and I, of course, end up in Neruda. We read Neruda in the school, and Lorca too, you know, but it's not the same. And Lorca gave me the first sense of, you know, poetry as a perfect join of image and sound and rhythm. You know, he combined those things very well. Neruda gave me a really idea that the objective and subjective happen in the same point, or there are not objective or subjective things. That is really a division of things that doesn't make any sense. Neruda can start a line with a very objective image, and the image is moving to a very abstract thing. He combined that thing. He has a powerful language. He showed me, you know, that reality is really complex, and his attempt to go inside reality, to be inside the things, inside the that was really important for me.
Thank you. Tal, maybe you can pick some of the questions that you see.
Okay, wait a minute. Well, Victor, people are asking about, maybe you could tell us about your last visit in Cuba.
Okay, my last visit in Cuba was in December. I go to Cuba every year, even sometimes 2 times every year. You know, anytime that I have the opportunity, I go there. I have my family there.
Your family is still in La Havana?
In Havana, but it's also in Trinidad. That is in the center of the island, you know, south of the center of the island. And I try to keep my link with Cuban writers and Cuban publisher, and I don't want to do, I want to be part of that culture. I have done everything possible without betraying my political principle to be part of that culture. And for many years, they didn't publish any of my books, but right now they are publishing, you know, I don't receive any promotion from the Cuban cultural authorities, but they publish my books. I'm really happy about that because I write from Cuba. I can be everywhere, but that's the locus of my poetry. Even it's not exactly Cuba. It's a little place in Cuba that nobody knows, and it's Cayama. Cayama is the really small neighborhood where I grew up in a very small town. Like I say, Cayamas is 11 houses, you know. And this is in a very nice neighborhood, a small neighborhood was an immigrant community. The majority of the family there were from Galicia, but they were Portuguese there, and they were even a Japanese family. My most recent book is about a Japanese guy. My mother looked like Japanese. And I don't know what happened there. Probably I have some kind of Japanese blood in my. It is a very unique place, and that's the locus of. I use that as the name of my first book, and I think if one day somebody wants to publish all my poetry, the name of all my poetry will be Cayama. Another question?
Sure.
Process. Okay.
Tal is frozen for some reason. Yeah. But if there is a question from the audience, Atara, if there's somebody who's raising his hand, maybe you can. I think there was some hands raised. Shachar, do you see some hands raised there?
No.
I saw that Miriam Friedman raised their hand.
I don't know how to use Zoom.
Anyone who raises their hand can write their questions in the chat. And
did you meet Allen Ginsberg when he was in Cuba?
No, because that was really before my time. I am old, but not old enough to.
He was in 65.
I wish to meet him. You know, I still like Allen Ginsberg poetry, especially the poetry that he wrote at the beginning. You know, and I don't have too much appreciation for the so-called beat generation anymore. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of crap there. And there is an overrated generation of American poetry. There are better American poets and better generation, but have been the most influential generation of American poets in the after the, you know, the big names like Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, or William Carlos Williams. You know, but as I would love to meet, you know, Allen Ginsberg. I thought that I have, you know, the impression that we could be a very good friends, you know.
Because, you know, he was kicked out of Havana in '65.
Yeah,
you know, he was invited. He was invited by Castro. And what happened is that when he came, he thought that, you know, he was all for the Communist Party and everything. And then he saw that they were harassing homosexuals and they were against smoking pot. So he started, you know, talking about it. So they escorted him to the airport where he got in trouble in Europe, in Prague. So he was looking for trouble. So you think you've been getting along fine with him, huh? Making all this trouble around the world.
Yeah, well, I love troublemakers, you know. Poets, we are a little bit troublemakers. No, not at all. You know, I have a in deep sympathy with that kind of people, you know.
And there was a question. Yeah, who was it? Noah, did you want to say something?
No, it was me. It's okay. Say it, Gilad. Hola, Victor.
Hola.
So there's a question. So what would be your dream as a poet that is so successful today, and that his poetry is translated all over the world? So what's your next goal?
My next goal is to do the same thing as I have been doing since the beginning. It is basically reading. I'm a reader, and that's writing is something that's secondary. You know, the pressure of reading poetry. I have, you know, you don't see here where I'm books, but my house, there is not a place for another book. And there is not more pressure for me that sit down. Right now, I was doing, reading some romantic poets from Romanticism. I was reading Hölderlin and Goethe at the same time, alternating poems. You know, reading one in the morning, Hölderlin, in the afternoon, Goethe. And then but at the same time, I'm reading Juan Ramón Jiménez, the Spanish poet that is an amazing poet. And right now, nobody talk about him, even though he won the Nobel Prize, whatever, but Spanish poetry is in kind of, right now, praising too much realism. And that Ramón Jiménez doesn't fit in that kind of poetry.
Oh, Tal is back. You're kind of now you're okay. Say it again because you're on mute, please, Tal.
I was kidnapped for a few minutes, but now I am liberated again.
Good.
With you.
And so we were having this small little chat between us, and there was this question. You know, we talked about the influence on your poetry from the Spanish tradition, and there was a question about the English tradition. Do you feel any dialogue or influence? This is the question.
If I feel in dialogue with American poetry, for instance, poetry in English.
Yeah, this was the question.
Yes, I am an American poet too. You know, I'm all the time. Even I am right now. My oral English is bad. You know, even though I was one time doing a reading in one of the BBC channels in the radio programs in the UK, and I asked, you know, people say, well, I apologize for my English, something, and the program take phone calls, you know, and people start calling because that was a program that have that. And the guy who will invite me to go to the program say, hey, we have here a really very interesting person who wants to talk to you. It was John Berger. And John Berger tell me, Victor, I don't want to see you any time in your life apologizing about your English. You speak English better than the captain of the national rugby team. And that was what I want to say is that basically half of my reading to say is in English, and I'm very aware. I'm very involved in the poetry movement, let's say, poetry life in United States, and I feel, you know, my concept of America is different than Trump. You know, Trump exclude people like me from America, and I think that I'm part of America too.
Mm. So
you know, this is a country that have a multilingual literature, you know, multilingual poetry. I'm not only the only one who's writing poetry in Spanish in this country.
I don't know if this question was answered when I was while I was kidnapped, but people were asking if you write in Spanish, if you only write in Spanish.
Yes, I only write in Spanish in the, let's say, in the surface, because I use only Spanish words, but sometimes in a more deepest way, syntactically, in other kind of structure. Sometimes I am thinking in English and writing in Spanish at the same time. That is different to translate yourself. And not
but you do translate yourself from Spanish to English, don't you?
Yeah, well, in certain way, yes, because sometimes I think in English, and when I write in Spanish, and I always are at this point of my life checking how a line sounds in both languages. But I keep writing in Spanish in many ways, because there is no reason to go to English. I don't will reach more audience. I will do anything better writing in English than in Spanish. You know, it's good to be part of a minority. You know, to fight from the corner, little corner, that to be a mainstream poet.
Tal and Victor, I invite you to say something for closure, some blessing, something sweet, anything you want to. And after that, I will tell what's going on in the next session.
I will say something first so that I can leave the last word for Victor. I feel a very strange mixture of happiness and sadness. I'm very happy to be able to meet, and it's apparently so easy to be meeting this way, and we can cross large distances, and we can talk to anyone, and there's no problem of distance and time and geography, etc. But on the other hand, I feel that we've been trapped in this on this small screen inside the Zoom, and nobody really knows when the most natural, obvious, everyday things that we never thought about, just as you said, Victor, we never knew how happy we were. We don't know when and whether this will be given back to us. I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but just as you also said, to be a pessimist is to keep your eyes open. So on the one hand, I'm really happy, really, and very emotional too, to see you here, because I missed you, and it's always good to hear you and talk to you. But on the other hand, I will give all this Zoom, and forgive me, the organizers, this very beautiful and impressive festival, for just one real hug, in a true hug, a true embrace in the true life. So Victor, I hope we'll meet again, and we'll do it the right way. Thank you so much for bringing everything you brought to this meeting tonight, all these riches that you gave us.
Thank you, Tal. That's really wonderful words. Well, the only thing that I want to add, well, first, thank you so much for doing this. We have to keep doing what we are doing, because we are not wrong. We are doing the right thing, and we are a minority. But this is really, we are not doing anything wrong. We are right in what we are doing. Poetry is something that is really important. Poetry, I don't know what poetry, if poetry help us in our personal life, can help everybody in to deal with really difficult situations like this, even to deal with happiness that is not easy to deal with. And I like a lot that you develop this kind of way of doing poetry festival, because the majority of poetry festival have stopped or are doing, a different kind. I like this format a lot, and I don't like the festival that you go there and read one poem and that's it, and that happened a lot of time, that you go, to Struga. For instance, you go to Struga and you go, you read one poem, you cross the Atlantic Ocean in order to read.
And Victor, it's called the One Poem Festival.
Yeah, no, that's really like this.
And it's huge. You have like 100 poets there coming from all over the world. And there is just one poem.
and you don't use those poets, you know, that you don't.
You just take them from one place to another.
Exactly. That doesn't make any sense. I like this format a lot. You are using, you know, technology in the right way, like a tool to approach, you know, make us a community. No, thank you so much. I would love to go to Israel soon and, you know, find all you healthy and writing poetry, and, you know, we are doing the right thing. That's my slogan right now.
I would say amen and hallelujah.
Okay.
And,
okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Ciao.
Tal.
Ciao,
Noah
ciao.
and the Poetry Place
Ciao,
team. And we will meet at 8:30 Israel time with Kenneth Goldsmith and Eran Adas. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.